Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Conscious Business Connections, brought to you by the New York City chapter of Conscious Capitalism. My name is Bob Caporale, and I'm joined today by Bradley Bailyn of the Bailin Law Firm located in Brooklyn, New York. Bradley, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. So, Bradley, as you very well know, I know you're involved in conscious capitalism and in our chapter. And as you know, conscious capitalism is really a philosophy that capitalism is a good thing if businesses practice it in a conscious way. And there are actually four tenets to the philosophy focused on things like leadership, conscious culture, stakeholders, and companies that have a higher purpose, right? And when companies, again, practice these things and incorporate them into a business, capitalism is actually a very good thing for the world. So what we want to talk about today is how, some of those practices are things that you're doing within your firm. And that way other people can learn from those things and hopefully incorporate them into their own businesses as well. So let's go ahead with that introduction. Start off by telling us a little bit about the Bailin Law Firm.
All right. So the Bailin Law Firm works primarily with startups and small businesses that have a major focus on ethics.
Oh, awesome.
And this may be the kind of thing that people say, oh, yeah, sure, I'm ethical. But there's a tremendous difference between literally in all of your legal papers, building out a corporation with an ethical DNA and just simply giving it lip service. And that's what my clients do, is they make something that's built to last on an ethical foundation.
That's really awesome. So, and you're exactly right. You hit on a hot button for me already, right? Because a lot of companies want to say that they do something or stand for something or practice something. But then when you actually talk to the employers, they're like, no, that's not really what they're doing at all. So what are some examples of how a company can kind of practice what they preach and how you help them do that?
All right. Well, the way it typically starts is the founder has a vision. The founder wants to be ethical in every way, but usually there's a particular concern that the founder has: environmental friendliness, treating employees really well, whatever it is. So you're going to want to take your own vision of ethics.
Yep.
And incorporate that into everything that you're doing. So, for example, your employee handbook is what governs what the employees are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do and how they're compensated. And when your company is evaluated, the employee handbook is literally the standard of what the rules are in your company.
Yeah.
So, that's what the human resources department is going to use when 360 reviews are done and all these other reviews. So we want to sit down and say, okay, has every element of the employee handbook been examined? And does it meet our goals for diversity and inclusion, for environmental concern, for caring for people in a variety of different ways? And it's also something you can put in your shareholders agreement to make sure that all the investors are being truthful when they say that they're in it for the vision that you have and not for and not for the money, when a lot of times they're there exactly for the money and they end up torturing the founder. And a lot of the times the founders just walk away. They say, this is just not why I did this. And so right from the beginning, by structuring a business where every document that governs the business all ties into each other and all have that focus on the ethical vision of the business and the mission, it really makes the employees feel a lot better. It makes the right people want to get involved, and it incorporates into all of the daily decisions the ethical principles, and it actually creates one of those amazing ethical companies that people love working for, and where the brand just grows and grows and grows. They're like, how do they do that?
Yeah.
I'm saying the same thing they're saying. How is it that, they're doing so well and I'm not? It's like, because they're really serious and they live it every day, and this is how you live it.
It's really aligning everything. There's a couple things I want to go into there, because you mentioned two very important topics. The first is actually having an employee handbook, right? Which I think, I think sometimes people come at it with the assumption, well, let me go review your employee handbook. I've worked with companies, and we're talking about small businesses, right? 10 employees, things like that. They don't even know what an employee handbook is, right? And it's not until they go and they sign up with an HR form or get an HR person in that they say, hey, maybe we should have something like that. But do you think it's fair to say that a lot of small businesses don't even have that at all?
Yeah, I mean, all the time I work with small businesses that don't have it or just grabbed one from somewhere, paid a few $100 for it and downloaded it. And particularly in places like New York City and San Francisco and other places that are very much focused on employee rights and and worker protections, to not have an employee handbook is opening yourself up to massive amounts of litigation
Yeah,
and investigations by the government and fines. But what's much more important than that is it's the entire ethical foundation for the business.
right.
A good employee handbook can be hundreds of pages long, and it deals with issues that a lot of times you would never even think of, that just pop up out of nowhere. And as the company is growing, which a lot of my clients are, they're adding an employee a month or something like that, and they just don't know what everyone's doing. But it covers things you may never think of. For example, gifting and bribery policies, right?
Right.
So that's why it's so important to have a good employee handbook.
Yeah, right. I mean, so number one, to keep people in legal compliance, absolutely no doubt. I think there's another piece though I want to get your thoughts on, which is the whole idea of, but because going back to the first point actually is that I think people inherently think that others are going to do the right thing, right? And so I think that's kind of how, because being a business owner myself and being in a situation where I was partnered with another business owner at one point, you just kind of assume that people are going to act and behave the way that you do, whatever that is. And it's just not always the case. Sometimes there's ethical concerns, sometimes there's just cultural differences, right? Sometimes I feel a certain way about doing business, but my employees don't feel that way or whatever else. So do you feel like it can help align a company around the culture they want to have, not just the laws, but also the culture they want to have, and also the environment that they want to foster for their employees?
Well, totally. That's what it does, is it builds the culture. It really gives you something tangible
Yeah.
that defines the culture and allows the culture to trickle down into all of the activities. And it's funny that you say how everyone just thinks that other people are going to do the right thing, which is their definition of the right thing. And a lot of times it's surprising because people just have completely different understandings of what the right thing is. A lot of
Right.
times I will go through the basic rules of the company with new employees, who are about to sign, just to make sure they're literally culturally on the same page as us. And we'll get to things like you can't go and start your own business and take the company's trade secrets and accounts with you.
Yeah.
And they'll look at me and they'll be like, why not? This is why we're in America, is to have free enterprise and capitalism. Like, if the whole reason I'm joining this company is so I can learn more about it and make contacts and then go start my own business. And at first I was taken aback, and I was like, wait, so you're telling me that from your ethical point of view, stealing the company's trade secrets and clients is absolutely fine?
Yeah.
I don't say it that way, but and they're like, well, yeah, why do skilled people go work for anyone else except to improve their skills and then go make money for themselves? No one
Right.
wants to be an employee their whole life. And so,
They didn't
literally.
see it the same way, right? They just didn't see it the same way.
Right. So by going through it with them, all those cultural differences come up. And then I'll, say to those people, I don't think you're right for this company. That's just not the culture we have here. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying it's not the culture that we have.
It's not what we want. Maybe there are some companies that are okay with those things, right? And so that I think that that's part of this alignment. And I think there's also, I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were talking about whether something is ethically right or not, whatever. And I was saying, well, our intention is a certain thing. I was like, well, but intention is not is due open to interpretation, right? So your intention might be okay, but it may be misinterpreted by somebody as a different intention. And so this is what an employee handbook would help to do, right? Is really get all those things down on paper, which I think is so important. Well, the second thing that I wanted to kind of unpack here a little bit that you mentioned was talking about, as companies grow and you get other investors involved or shareholders involved and things of that nature, you want to make sure that those shareholders are in it for the same reasons that you're in it, right? Do you see something as simple as a handbook helping with those types of things as well?
I do in a variety of ways. Of course, directly when they review all of the company's documents, they see it, if it's something they agree with and whether it's something they're going to need your consent to modify.
Hmm.
But second, they go and they meet with all the employees a lot of times and they do a cultural fit evaluation. And when they find out how things are done at this company, a lot of times if it's not a right cultural fit, that may be observed. And on the other side, they may get very excited. Someone who may not necessarily be willing to do the deal because you're a little too small, or there's someone who's more attractive for a variety of reasons. They may be like, you know what, we love your culture and we're going to buy your company for that. And in fact, I've spoken with multiple very large investors, and a lot of times one of the main things that they're buying is the staff. Like
Right.
if you're a one person company that makes $50 million, it's a lot harder to sell your company than if you have a whole bunch of employees that are really coherent and a great culture, because the way they see it is it's hard to do that internally. So a lot of times when you buy a great company and a great culture, that is equally as important, if not more important, than the intellectual property.
Right. And really and truly, again, having been involved in a number of these, both successful and not so successful, even the ones that were quote unquote financially successful, in order to get the longevity that you're trying to get out of it, the cultural match is, I would say, the number one thing, right? I mean, when you have employees that feel differently about doing business than another company that's acquiring them, whether that's, these guys are for higher purpose, these guys are for profit, whether it's that, they just see the world differently. It's a very, very difficult thing to marry companies like that together. And I would think the same thing with investors, shareholders, anybody that's trying to come into a new culture, right?
And
Um,
that's such a problem for a lot of boards. This is something that comes up for me all the time. It's almost like a marriage where a lot of people get together whose skills on the surface seem really great, but their values are not the same. The
right.
CEO has one purpose and vision and mission, and the people on the board are thinking about something totally different or have a different perspective, and maybe are more short-term profit oriented, and so on and so forth, and they end up disliking each other. And the other day I was having lunch with a very high level investor, and he was saying to me, he's like, even when I place an order, he's like, I'm very afraid to do business with startups,
Mm.
and I want to support the startups, but I'm terrified. And I said, why? And he said, because a lot of times they can't scale. Even though everything looks great on the surface, I'm terrified that if I place $1 million or a 5 million or a $10 million order, that all of a sudden everyone's going to be running in a different direction. They're all going to have different values, and all the cracks below the surface are going to come out, and they're just going to mess the whole thing up. So that's why he was saying a lot of times I just prefer to go with larger, more expensive, more established companies. Even though I feel bad about doing that, I want to support startups because most of the time they can't give me that confidence that they've got a cohesive culture, and for that reason they're capable of scaling to fulfill a major order or to absorb a major investment.
Really, really important. And if a company has a higher purpose, a company has a real vision, getting that all down on paper and getting everyone aligned behind that would, I imagine, help to alleviate some of that concern. So it's really, really important. So, just to kind of summarize a couple of things that I'm taking from this is obviously having some type of employee handbook and documentation would help with the legal issues, the ethical issues. To me, that's a no starter, right? If you don't have that kind of stuff. But then also on the more subtle way of thinking is that it helps to align cultures, and especially when we're talking about conscious businesses, if you want to instill a conscious business culture, if your company has a higher purpose, getting that down in writing so that everyone is aligned behind that sounds like it's a pretty important thing. So one last question, Bradley, is that besides the obvious answer of call me, but if somebody wanted to start with this, right, and get started, because I imagine a lot of small business owners don't even really know where to get started with an employee handbook. So clearly they can call you, but are there any other resources that you would recommend that they can at least start looking into this?
Well, you can start by just looking up how to form your own code of ethics, how to put together a code of ethics. because, to some degree, some parts of the employee handbook are standardized, and what's not standardized is where do you come out on all of these different standardized rules and procedures. How are you going to promote people? How are you going to hire people? And I would add that this is important as well, because in today's day and age, where we're really talking about diversity and inclusion and implicit racism and systematic racism and stuff like that, the way this kind of thing plays out is, the CEO will be like, well, I would never have systematic racism in my company. And the people who work there are like, not only are you systematically racist, but you're systematically sexist and this and that.
Whatever else
And
you want to put on the list, right?
right. And when you get charged with those things because someone has been laid off or whatever, the way it works is someone sits down from the appropriate government agency and they say, I need to see what you have in writing. I need to know exactly what your policies are towards how you promote somebody, how you decide who gets time off, how you decide which volunteer projects you're going to fund. And so you really have to have a good idea of what your own vision is. And then the attorney can make sure that everything is transparent and ethical and satisfies the state. But if you're just like, well, really, we try to make money in the most non-racist way possible, they may just hit you with a huge fine. They're going to say that doesn't mean anything. That means whatever you feel like on Monday
Right.
is what your company does, and whatever your manager feels like when you're not around is what your company does. So now I believe it's becoming a legal requirement, not just good business, that you really nail down your ethical vision for every aspect of your company, and that it's documented and that it's integrated. And of course, the first step is knowing, even without the law, what do you want to do? How are you going to
Right.
make these decisions? What conduct do you even expect from people? And you're going to find that it's a lot harder than it seems to figure out, when you've got many people with many different viewpoints of what's right. Like we talked about earlier, like, what do you think is right?
Right. Yeah. And it's really important. It's a great point. And even if you don't think about it in terms of litigation, which of course that's your job is to make sure that people are thinking about that. But even if a company doesn't think in those terms, it's just a matter of, look, if you have a certain thing that you're passionate about, you feel a certain way, you want to run your company a certain way, don't assume that everyone that works for you is doing that same thing and carrying out that same vision. Right. So you may feel that you're behaving in a certain way when really as a company as a whole, you're not. So it just sounds like this is such an important part of a company's infrastructure and making sure they're doing the right thing. So Bradley, with all that said, I want to make sure that if people are interested in getting some more advice from you and talking to you a little bit more, where could they get more information and contact you?
You can give me a call at 646-326-9971. As I always love to say, information is free. You don't have to be afraid to call me that I'm going to be like, oh, it's this much money just to talk on the phone with me. Like, I love what I do, and I love making the world a better place. And I'm happy to speak with anyone who wants to call. And if you want to email, you can email Brad, that's B-R-A-D, at BailinLaw.com.
Mm-hmm.
BAILYN law.com. And I'm a very active LinkedIn poster. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you can totally do that and you'll see all my posts. And
Awesome. And we'll
I
make
guess
sure that
those are
we
the
put a link
ways.
to that. Yeah, we'll probably, we always put a link somewhere in the description. So I think we'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile if that's okay with you. And then I think that's probably the easiest way that people can connect via the web, which I think would be great. So that's awesome. Bradley, again, thank you so much for being on the show. I think you've given some great insights and some things. Again, we always love to have when people can take something really really tangible away from this show. And I think you've given that today. So we really thank you for being a part of that. So also, we want to thank you as our audience for being a part of our community and being a part of our show. If you want to learn more about what we do at Conscious Capitalism, specifically the New York City chapter, you can go to consciouscapitalism.nyc. That'll take you to our webpage. And that's also part of the national organization, so you could learn more about the national organization there. We also don't want to leave without thanking the sponsors of our chapter, the Core Club and the Tomiak Foundation, of which Bradley is actually a part of the board on the Tomiak Foundation. So we thank you for that as well. But thanks to our sponsors for sure, because they make programs like this possible. And If you liked what you heard, you got something out of this show, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel so more people can learn about this, share it with your friends. Our goal is to spread the mission of conscious capitalism. So we'll hope that you'll join us in that endeavor. And with all of that said, we thank you for joining. We'll see you back here in another episode of Conscious Business Connections. Thanks for joining.